thank you for still being with us, because we now want to go into more of a panel discussion. But before I introduce the chair of the panel, can I just ask you to applaud once more for Hannah's superb This is, I believe, the 5th time that the MERL Annual Lecture has featured a panel discussion, and including an opportunity for you, as members of the audience, to ask questions. It's my role just really to introduce to you Dr Paddy Bullard, who is chairing this panel tonight and will lead us from here on. So, Paddy is Associate Professor of English Literature and convener of the University's Collections Research Network. His research focuses on British 18th century satire, but he also writes on a range of rural topics, including Georgic poetry and traditional song. As academic lead on the Museum of the Intangible project, Paddy has been working closely with the MERL in the past few years. So, ladies and gentlemen, I hand you over to Paddy to lead the panel discussion.
Thanks very much for that generous introduction. Can everyone hear me? Hello. Hello. Welcome everyone. It's a real delight to be. This is actually the 2nd year that I've had the great honour of being in the chair for the MERL Annual Lecture. I feel, just stick with me on this analogy for a little bit. I feel a little bit like Jonathan Ross in the late 1990s when he wasn't on telly very much, but he always got to introduce the British Comedy Awards. And similarly, every year for the last 2 years, my very ordinary existence as a rank-and-file lecturer has been lit up by the opportunity to chair the MERL Annual Lecture. So thank you very much to Katy and her colleagues for giving me this moment in the spotlight. It's especially good to be involved this evening because my own research and teaching connects so strongly with the themes of the MERL Annual Lecture this year. As Robert mentioned, I collaborated with Greta Bertram and with Ollie Douglas and Guy Baxter on the Museum of the Intangible project last year, where we explored different ways in which creative responses can help us to peel away the layers of history and of heritage in our museums and in the traditions that we have inherited, cultural traditions that we've inherited. I'm currently taking forward a lot of the work that we did in that project with Jack Thacker, who was Poet-in-Residence at MERL last year, on a new project. We're looking at rolling out some of the creative techniques that were pioneered in the Museum of the Intangible in a network of smaller rural museums around the country. And finally, as an English literature lecturer, I run what I think is one of the very few specialist folk song modules. You'll be entirely unsurprised to know that every year I manage to recruit 12 enthusiastic undergraduates here, and we come down to the MERL and we study folk song, around the MERL collections. It's a very inspiring thing to do. Those are my credentials for taking the chair this evening, but of course the people you really want to hear about are the people on my left, our panellists this evening. I'd like to start with Greta Bertram to my immediate left here. Greta is curator of the Crafts Study Centre at the University of Creative Arts at Farnham, and has also worked for many years in collaborating with us here at the Museum of English Rural Life. She is a former trustee and I think secretary of the Heritage Craft Association, and continues to work as an independent researcher on craft. Greta is nobly and bravely stepping in for Geraint Parfitt, who you saw in the film earlier on, who is unable to join us this evening. Secondly, Katy Spicer is Chief Executive of the English Folk Dance and Song Society, the EFDSS, which formed in 1932, although it had predecessor organisations going back to 1911. Her achievements since taking the helm there in 2008 have included the launch of the indispensable full English online database, which I use extensively in my folk song module, the development of the EFDSS's award-winning music and performance program, and the introduction of a pioneering artist development program which works with folk professionals all stages of their careers. These and many other achievements were recognised in 2012, I think, when the EFDSS became an Arts Council England national portfolio organisation. Next, going around on my leftward journey is Jackie Oates. Jackie Oates has made an absolutely crucial, very distinguished contribution to the current mood health of the English folk music scene. Jackie grew up surrounded by the music that she plays. Her brother Jim Morrow, many of you will know, is also a distinguished folk museum. In 2000, folk musician. In 2003, Jackie was a finalist on the BBC Two Young Folk Awards. In 2009, she won the BBC Radio 2 Folk Awards Horizon Prize and took home the award for Best Traditional Track on the same night. Jackie is currently musician in residence at the MERL, and we should all join her in congratulating her on the launch of I've been trying to count, 7th studio album, Joy of Living, which was released on ECC Records back in July. And then finally, Hannah James needs no introduction after that extraordinary and wonderful, moving performance that we just saw there. Although I must just say a personal thank you to Hannah. There's a particular video on YouTube of Hannah clog dancing with Sam Sweeney playing the fiddle in what looks like your front room, or possibly Sam Sweeney's front room.
Possibly, yeah.
And there's about 10,000 or something hits on YouTube. My 6-year-old daughter is responsible for about 1,000 hits. I've seen that so many times, and it still entertains me. It's still wonderful. Thank you for that extraordinary performance.
Thank you.
I'd like to begin the discussion this evening by talking about what all of us here at this table have in common, which is that we all belong to different, as it were, divisions of the arts that are concerned with tradition, and particularly with traditions of practice. I want to begin by asking each panellist to talk briefly, just for sort of 2 or 3 minutes, about how they feel their artistic practice helps their publics, their audiences, to understand our common past, our cultural heritage. Greta, if I could begin with you. You've worked in heritage craft for many years, and you're currently working at the Craft Study Centre in Farnham. To what extent, after a year working at Farnham, do you still feel that museums are the right or a useful setting for the study of traditional crafts?
I think there is a very important distinction to make between museums, which are very much concentrated on looking after and preserving the physical objects associated with craft, and other sort of organisations or ways, things that look after, are concerned with the preservation and safeguarding and continuation of the craft skills. So here at MERL we've got very traditional crafts, and they're paralleled with the Heritage Crafts Association, which supports those traditional craft skills. So MERL looks after the baskets, whereas the Heritage Crafts Association would support the basket makers to ensure those skills carry on. And likewise at Farnham, at the Craft Study Centre, we have a collection of 20th century craft, but we're part of the University for the Creative Arts, where we have students making those things. And I think it's really important to try and bring the two together, because understanding how things are made, if you understand how they're made, you understand why they're made, why they are as they are. And I think the sort of traditional craft, or any craft practitioner, can really help you understand those objects. But likewise, museum objects and museum collections have a lot to offer practitioners in terms of developing their skills and their knowledge, and also providing inspiration for their future work.
Thank you. Katy, if I could put the second question to you, please. You're the director of one of the UK's most important institutions for vernacular art, I suppose. What is your answer to people who say, or when they say, and they must say this to you fairly regularly, that as soon as an art needs safeguarding by an institution like yours, it's half dead, not quite itself, not vernacular, fully vernacular anymore? What's your answer to that?
Well, I think for the EFDSS and its predecessors, the Folk Song Society and the English Folk Dance society, were originally set up to collect this material, particularly tunes and songs, and then a little bit later dances, social dances and what we call display dances, which probably most people will think of as Morris dances or variations on. And they wanted to collect them and write them down, which in itself is a little bit of an odd thing to do with something that is an oral transmission. Because they felt that with the rapid change from rural to an agricultural to an industrial society during the 19th century, all that material was going to be lost. Those people were no longer going to be handing down in those traditional oral methods. So it left us, I suppose, it's left the organisation in that, you know, that's a sort of odd position where this oral tradition is now written down and then later recorded. But I think the key thing for us, or for the organisation, you know, from the beginning, from 1932, but certainly now, is it is about the preservation of those, you know, original songs as they were perhaps collected in the early part of the 20th century, and the dances that were notated in the same time, and there are still people going around collecting music and dances. But it's about that material being there as source material, as inspirational material to artists like Jackie and Hannah, and then for them to take them and do with them what they feel. So they might say, I love this as I found this piece, I'm going to sing it exactly as it is on this piece of manuscript, exactly the words, exactly the timing, exactly the music. Or they say, as is very common, I like those words, I like that tune, let me see if I can mix it up. Or that's a great tune, but there's no words to go with it. Or that's a great set of words, there's no tune to go with it. Or as, you know, as Hannah has done, I'm taking all my clog dancing steps that I've, you know, learned and have been handed down and passed on, but I'm now going to do something really different and exciting. And that's the important thing, is that it isn't about preserving so that everybody continues to do it in the right way, whatever that might be, but it's there as the inspiration, as the source material, as the stories behind, as Greta was saying about craftspeople. But it's there as that living, breathing art form that artists like these two wonderful women can take and do with, and it keeps it alive and living and developing.
That's a pretty impressive case, I have to say.
Thank you very much.
I won't be asking you that question anytime soon. It's a pretty persuasive answer. Jackie, the next question for you. We'll know you here as a performer, as a musician, as a recording artist, principally, but of course there's another side to your professional life as well. You're a teacher also and an educationalist. When you work in schools, a lot of the work that you do in schools involves music and involves the folk tradition as well, as I understand it, isn't it? To what extent do you feel that of the two activities that you do, which do you think is more about the passing on of a tradition? Do you feel that you're passing on a tradition as a teacher or as a musician? Is one or the other role more important to you in terms of safeguarding?
They're both equally important, really, because when I'm performing, I'm reaching out to an audience who are kind of expecting me to perform, and they're looking for my type of music, whereas at school, I think it's a really unique chance when you're growing up and you're at primary school or secondary school to come across this music and song completely by chance when you wouldn't otherwise know it was there. And it's not exclusive in schools, it's available for everyone. So I think it is so important to inspire children and for them to have access to their heritage and both sort of national folk songs and geographically specific folk songs. I work at a primary school in Wallingford, and I'm determined to sneak as much local folk song in as I possibly can. And I'm just aware that, you know, it's quite a rare thing, I think, in primary schools that there happens to be someone around that can teach these songs to the children at the moment. So I think there needs to be a lot more of it, because it's such a wonderful thing.
Can I just ask you, have you used the geographical database on Full English?
Oh yes, yeah, continuously for the last few years. It's provided a lot of inspiration.
It's an extraordinary thing. Finally, Hannah, I think more than anyone else here on this panel, your work as an artist, I think, happens independently of organisations and institutions. Is it fair enough to say that?
Yeah, I suppose so. Yeah.
To what extent, listening to the rest of this conversation, to what extent do you feel that your work as an independent artist, do you feel it brings you closer to a vernacular tradition? Do you feel more at liberty to access that vernacular tradition?
What, through being an independent artist?
Through being independent as opposed to...
Yeah, I suppose it just means that I get to choose exactly what I want to do and exactly how I want to represent the tradition or mess with it, or and it's really great to hear your take on the Full English and all the archives that you've got, because I do use them all the time and kind of mess with them, write new tunes for them, kind of use bits of words for pieces and stuff. So yeah, I suppose being an independent artist maybe means that I can make work that is slightly more personal, and I don't often get asked to do things like this, for instance, where there was a bit of a brief and intangible history. That was the thing and to run with, and I've actually really enjoyed that. It's been great.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, all of you. We're now going to sort of move on to a bit more of a kind of couple of quick fire round questions, if that's okay. The first one is a grossly unfair question, and I apologise for it in advance, but I want you to try and think ahead to the year 2050. I think I'm probably going to be through in 2050. Okay, well, shall we make it 2040 instead? Same ballpark. We've got a chance, Katy, of still being here in 2040. Looking in your crystal balls, where do you imagine your craft, the heritage traditions which you're involved in, where do you imagine they will be in 2040? Hannah, can I start with you?
Oh my gosh.
Do you think about it at all?
I suppose I've never thought about it in quite that way. I mean, it just really depends whether we continue to value this stuff and get it to young people or not. And I really don't know. It feels like we're at a bit of a tipping point at the moment. I was really lucky because my mum taught me to clog dance first, and then after that I joined this amazing group called the Fosbrooks, which is based in Stockport. It's basically, and there's probably a few nods in the audience, the Fosbrooks. It's basically the best after-school club in the world, I think. It's run by this amazing woman called Liza Austin, and it's been going since the 20s, and it's as a group of accordion players and clog dancers. But now she runs it at her school. She's a primary school teacher in quite a rough end of Stockport, and everyone at this particular school gets the chance to do clog. And what that means is 2 after-school kind of get-togethers every week, and then Easter schools, kind of weekend stuff, proper performances. It's amazing. It's absolutely amazing. And I wish that existed at every school, because it's such a valuable thing. And there's people like Amy Thatcher, Nicola Lyons, me, people that are working professionally on the folk scene, who all came through that. And I wouldn't play the accordion if it wasn't for that. I would probably still clog dance, but I might have got bored of it because I didn't really know that many people my age that were doing it until I joined that. So yeah, I feel like Liza does all that stuff completely off her own back, just because she's really dedicated, and she really dedicates her life to it. And we either need people like her who are really rare, or we need funding and for schools and the education system to take this stuff seriously. So.
But as long as there are people like her,
yeah,
there's every chance.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, everyone that went through the Fosbrooks that I know, even if they don't dance at all anymore, saw it as a massively valuable thing. And like Liza was saying to me that all the kids that go through it end up doing better in school than they would be predicted to do and stuff. And there is research that says that out-of-school arts activities actually have a positive impact on academic success as well. So it's, we've got all the evidence to say that we need this stuff to happen. Yeah.
Jackie, I imagine that resonates with you as well. But what about your crystal ball? How do you imagine it in 2040? Are you optimistic?
Yeah, I am optimistic because I've seen English folk music kind of evolve and go in certain fashions, and throughout my time as a folk fan, it's kind of remained quite strong. It's just gone off in these different tangents. So I think the way in which we go and watch folk music and enjoy it will be very different. I think the old framework of the folk club might be something very different by then, and likewise sessions, live music sessions in pubs, and I worry about them a little bit. But I think thanks to the internet and all these online resources and the ways we have to listen to music, I think it's going to be healthy and strong. Again, I worry about the book collections and the song archives and how people of my generation can access them. I come from, my parents met at Manchester University Folk Club, and so I'm a second generation folkie, so I've been brought up in it. But my husband discovered folk music for himself when he was 19, which is quite rare, I think, to just chance upon it and find a way in. So, but I'm confident that it will be alive and well.
Katy, where do you think Cecil Sharp House and
Well,
the EFDSS will be in?
I sincerely hope it's obviously still there and still, doing things that are worth doing. That's a really difficult question. Ideally, what I would hope that by that point there are, youth dance ensembles and youth music ensembles right across the country. So there is so much activity going on, and if that's been going on for several decades, that will feed through the next generation of artists and librarians and archivists and organisers, as well as audiences. So I would hope that would happen. But I think, as Jackie was saying, it will be through a very different landscape to the one we know. I don't think there's any point in really sort of thinking it's going to come through the school system, or it's going to come through folk clubs or that setup as we know it now. But hopefully it will evolve and still be there and stronger.
Finally, Greta, the heritage crafts that you work so hard to conserve, to safeguard, a lot of them are more threatened than vernacular cultural traditions, arts traditions, I should say.
Yes.
Is that fair enough? Are you less optimistic?
I don't think that we're less optimistic. I think it's very fair to say we did some research last year and we found that there were 17 critically endangered crafts, so 17 crafts where there are fewer than 5 practicing craftspeople currently in the UK. But I don't think that means it's the end. I think some of these you only need a handful of people, and I'm, what's that phrase, cautiously optimistic. The biggest problem facing a lot of traditional crafts is a shortage of training opportunities. So what would be great is if in the next sort of 20 years more funding and mechanisms are put in place for passing on skills. Because there is a lot of interest out there. The kind of fate of crafts has kind of done this throughout the second half of the 20th century, and there's always kind of disappearing, and then there's revivals. And there are loads of regional basket making groups. There's regional bodging and wood turning groups. Spoon carving is becoming really hipsterish. There's Spoon Fest. These things are happening, but it's just
hipsters are going to save everything.
it's just getting people to know about it. I think it's a bit like if you're, accessing the folk scene. It's a lot easier if you come from that background. So that we need to help people find ways in.
Thank you very much, panellists. I'd like now to take the opportunity of opening the discussion to the floor. I'm very much hoping that there will be some questions from the floor, if that isn't putting you all on the spot too much. We have a microphone at the back. Felicity will hopefully come forward and push a microphone under your nose if you are brave enough to raise a hand aloft and ask a first question. Do I have a first question for the panel from the floor, please? Madam, it's really at the back.
Hi. I was interested in all your kind of careers, actually, that you do several different things, and listening to Greta talk about the research of the Heritage Crafts Association in the past. People are often doing teaching, performing, creating, selling, a range of different things. And I was just wondering if you could think of something, whether it's space or sponsorship, that would help you to continue your tradition. What's the kind of one thing that you think is key to making that happen?
I would say more funding in schools for music in general, because there's a real lack of it at the moment, a lack of focus on the arts, which is a real shame.
Can I just ask very quickly, where would you imagine, what do you imagine the conduit for the funding would be? Where would the funding come from? Is this Arts Council England?
Government. Just recognising music as a core subject and a value, because it has so much value. It helps social skills and focus and team building and all that sort of things.
Funding for exposure to crafts and making in schools. It's the same thing. All these creative subjects are being cut from schools, but also I don't think training for crafts necessarily has to happen in schools, but funding for craftspeople, because, or the person doing the training, they often don't get paid, and particularly if you take on an apprentice, you're expected to pay your apprentice. You're losing 20% of your income because you're spending a day a week teaching them, but you're not getting paid anything.
So apprenticeships?
Well, no, not apprenticeships, but funding. You think if you're a university student, you pay to go to university.
Yeah.
If you're learning a craft through an apprenticeship, you expect to be paid. There's a sort of funding for training, I think.
Any other thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, for me, as a clog dancer particularly, the thing that I could really do with is space to dance in more, because I've got a bit of room in my house, but it's not that sociable to practice clog dancing at home. So yeah, just access to rehearsal space is a big thing for me. I hire rehearsal space a lot, and it is expensive. City, you can't really find places in cities that are less than £10 an hour. So if you want to do a day of rehearsing, for instance, that starts to get expensive just to practice. Just support and spaces, free spaces to work in would be a massive thing for me. Yeah.
Spaces. Katy, is this a job for Cecil Sharp House?
It's partly a job. I mean, we do, as both of Hannah and Jackie will know, we do various schemes where we provide space for artists just to do research and development. They don't have to come up with anything that they want to perform at the end of it, but just the opportunity to create. But yes, I think it's sadly it's a sort of part of a bigger picture of, I think, not just an attitude to folk arts, but an attitude to arts. I mean, Hannah's already touched on that in terms of when talking about the Fosbrooks, and what being part of the Fosbrooks, what doing dance and music and all those does for a child and their learning. But I think as a country we love the arts, but we don't have a desperately positive attitude to it sometimes. And so it's always the thing, whether it's folk or any other form, it falls off, as we've talked about. We've just heard again this week about local authorities cutting more and more back. And I think until that attitude changes, then there not only won't be the money, but there won't be the spaces as well, for artists or craftspeople to try their craft or practice their art or try those things out.
A second question from the floor. Sir. Microphone is coming.
Thank you. Perhaps controversial question. A lot of the early collection of folk songs that I'm currently researching were tied in with a kind of nationalist wave, so people like Percy Grainger and all of that were involved in the early EFDSS, and then it was kind of followed up by a more socialist wave with people like A.L. Lloyd. How would you tie in the folk tradition to the very dramatic political climate of today?
Wow, that's an
Wow,
excellent question. Who is brave enough to tackle this kind of work? Doesn't play basket making, claims Greta.
Yeah, we need Grace Petrie up here.
Hannah, could I ask you to tackle this question? We have, Cecil Sharp, everyone knows what the political associations of Cecil Sharp were early on in the century, and everyone knows about Eliza Carthy complaining when I think the National Front claimed her as one of their. That was an extraordinary incident, wasn't it? Where do you stand on these?
Well, I don't know, I think it's interesting. I mean, this piece wasn't really working with traditional songs, but if you take my vocal trio, Lady Maisry, for instance, we are working a lot more with kind of traditional repertoire. And I think, it's all these songs are, you can either see them as kind of fixed in time and that you've just got to sing them as they were and as they were meant, or you can take these songs and you can sort of turn them on their head and use them as an example of an attitude or something that was happening that actually we don't agree with anymore. And it's all about the way that you actually present the songs, I think. And yeah, I think that's a starting point, is, thinking about, this is not maybe, something like London Town, which is a song that Bellowhead did. It's about a man who sleeps with a prostitute and then gets away without paying her. And it's all sung in a sort of like da-da-da-da disco beat at the back, which for me, I don't think we should be doing that, actually. I think a song like that should be sung with a much more grotesque edge. Like, it's a really grotesque song.
Also do.
Yeah, they do. But it's sung in a very celebratory way, and I think that's quite grim, actually. So I think it's up to us. We can still sing these songs. We can continue them, but I think it's important to sing them whilst responding in our present frame of mind. Yeah.
Yes. Jackie, I sense that you are also interested in this question.
Yes, in that I think that you have a responsibility when you take a song, because the point of bringing these songs back to life is that you're trying to convey something to the audience and you're trying to relate to them in the present day. So I'm aware that you have to be very careful. My first album, I was really into murder ballads, and I think for attention. So I just filled this album full of stabbings and brutality. Yes, and then I took it out on the road and I just thought, why am I doing this to people? Why am I playing with their emotions, and now I'm slightly older and I've been through childbirth and had more life experiences, and I think I'm a bit more in tune with just kind of the emotions of being human. I care deeply about...
Yeah.
Just care deeply about kind of being a custodian.
Katy, anything to add? Is this something? I mean, you have Cecil Sharp on, in headlines.
Yeah. I think it's an interesting one generally for artists. I don't know whether I feel that any artist should feel that they have to be political. I think if they want to be, that's absolutely their right to use their art as a political tool, but they shouldn't feel that they have to. But I think, you see through folk songs in particular over the, at least the last couple of centuries, where people, we're for example, we're looking at doing a project next year to mark the bicentenary of the Peterloo Massacre, another jolly subject, of course. But it's very interesting, in the little bit of research I have been doing is about the songs that were written at the time, which were political songs, because they were against the government of the time. And I think that pattern, like with most things, has gone up and down. The early collectors, of which obviously Sharp was one, I possibly you have to put them in the context of their time. You know, Sharp was Victorian. You have to remember that when you know, with some of the things that perhaps he said or did that, you know, might jar a little now, but he was a man of his time. But they were collecting because they thought this material was worth saving. You know, not because I think, anyway, my reading of it is not because they had any imperialistic or nationalistic view, particularly. One or two of them may have had, of course, but it's because they felt that this material was worth protecting and saving, and they felt, rightly or wrongly at the time, that it was going to disappear. So yeah, I think, you know, folk song has played, particularly folk song has had its political moments, its non-political moments, and there are artists out there that, you know, write and use folk song as a political tool, and there are others that don't, and I think there's absolutely room for both.
I think you all negotiated that question very, very beautifully indeed. And full of admiration. We've got a little bit of time left. There's time for a final question from the floor. Do I have one last question from the floor? There's a gentleman over there.
Thank you very much. My question relates to the title of the lecture. So it says Stepping Out of Time. I wondered how you might have seen, whether it's crafts or the interpretation of crafts music, how that might have developed in recent times to reflect changes in society. So is there a continuation of that narrative, the taking from the tradition and the history, and how has that been interpreted, say, in the last 40 years, and could you see that moving forward?
Okay, interpretation and innovation, but that's based in tradition over the last 40 years was the nub of that question. Greta, can I ask you to lead the charge on that, please?
I think you see that happening in all sorts of crafts. While you're very much rooted in your skills and your knowledge and techniques, you might be using new materials, either because traditional materials are no longer available or because you want to experiment, you want to try out using the same techniques on different materials, that kind of thing. There's also a change in the types of products that are made. I'm going to fall back to baskets because that's my comfort zone. But you might have sort of things where it was a particular or, I don't know, finding new purposes for baskets. So nobody particularly needs any of these very, very specific fishing baskets that were used in the herring fishing industry, but actually you might use those skills to make log baskets, or it's either kind of finding new uses for existing things that you're making, or making new things because there are new needs and that kind of thing. And then you might just want to go completely, you know, just use those skills to make something completely different that's just very different.
Thank you very much.
Default to the artist.
Okay, Jackie.
Yes, I think folk song and folk music is very, very a part of what's going on in the wider cultural world, and entirely influenced by settings and venues and musical fashions, and it's very, very shaped and continuously evolving and changing. And so you kind of went from, I think when I was born it was folk rock.
Yes.
And that evolved, and recently it's been more kind of chamber folk and influences from other cultural styles as well, and collaborations, and you know, doing what's the word? I'm too sleep deprived to think of it. When you're taking music of a different culture and combining fusions. Yes.
Yeah, so I think there's sort of two things really. To kind of continue what you were saying, I think like there's the reason why there's so many different versions of all these different folk songs is that people have interpreted them like in their own way continuously over time, and I think it's important to keep doing that, and we are kind of keeping doing that. And then the other thing is actually about the clogs and the clog making. Yeah, well, actually, I've been dancing for 23 years, no, 24 now, clog dancing, and actually this is the first time I've ever had a pair of shoes made with handmade soles, because I've always actually used the machine-made soles, because the makers that I go to are under much, they have deadlines and they need to earn money. They're not subsidised by museums, so they have to make their soles by machine. So I guess in a way that the need for clogs to be produced at a kind of quicker pace than handmade clogs can be has meant that most dancers are actually wearing machine-made shoes now. And this project has made me a bit sad, because obviously the actual skill of using this huge stock knife is a really important thing, and that would be so sad if that got lost as well. But yeah, so I guess, yeah, my dance and yeah, the way that people dance clog has meant that the way that the clogs are made is kind of had to evolve as well.
Thank you. Sorry, guys, shall I wind up the session now, or is Robert going to say something more? Were you planning to say a few more words? Yes, I think you were. Could I introduce, please, the Acting Vice Chancellor, Robert Van der Noort, again up to the stage. The microphone is coming over. Yeah.
I wasn't going to say much. I wasn't going to say much more than thanking the panel for entertaining us for the second half. And my sense is that, despite the challenge we have politically, that our intangible and both a tangible past is in good hands with people like these. So can I have one more applause from you all? Thank you.